The year was 2347, and humanity had finally received the message they had been waiting for since they first looked up at the stars. A golden invitation arrived at Earth's orbital command station, written in a language that took their best computers 3 days to translate. The Galactic Council, a governing body of 847 different alien species, had decided that humans were ready to join the larger community of the universe. Daniel Cooper read the invitation 7 times before he believed it was real. Daniel was 52 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many difficult negotiations. He had spent 30 years as a diplomat on Earth, solving conflicts between nations that hated each other, finding common ground where none seemed to exist. His wife had died 10 years ago, and his children were grown with families of their own. He had nothing left to prove on Earth. But the stars still called to him. The United Earth government selected him to lead their delegation to the council. Some politicians wanted younger representatives, people who looked stronger and more impressive. But the president of Earth, a wise woman named Catherine Wells, insisted on Daniel. She told the selection committee that humanity needed someone who could listen before speaking and think before acting. Daniel Cooper was that kind of man. The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 weeks aboard the diplomatic vessel called the Horizon. Daniel spent most of that time studying everything humanity knew about the alien species they would meet. The information was limited and often contradictory. Gathered from brief contacts and intercepted communications over the past century, he learned that the Vorthani were the oldest and most powerful species in the Council. Beings made of living crystal who had traveled between stars when humans were still living in caves. He learned that the Cathari were a hive-minded species who shared thoughts like humans shared words. He learned that there were hundreds of other species, each with their own history and culture and way of seeing the universe. His aide on this mission was Lieutenant Maria Santos, a young woman of 35 who had served with him for 7 years. She was sharp and quick and never missed a detail. Daniel trusted her more than anyone else in the galaxy, and he knew he would need that trust in the days ahead. When the Horizon finally arrived at Nexus Prime, Daniel stood at the observation window and felt his breath catch in his throat. The station was enormous beyond anything he had imagined, a ring of metal and light that circled a small moon like a crown. Thousands of ships moved around it in careful patterns, vessels of every shape and size from hundreds of different worlds. He saw crystalline Vorthani cruisers that sparkled like diamonds in the starlight. He saw massive Cathari hive ships that moved like living creatures. He saw ships that defied description, built by species whose very existence he had never suspected. Maria stood beside him, equally amazed. She whispered that she had never felt so small in her entire life. Daniel nodded and told her that feeling small was the beginning of wisdom. The council chambers were located at the heart of Nexus Prime, a vast amphitheater that floated in an artificial void. When Daniel entered for the first time, he had to remind himself to keep walking. The chamber was filled with beings that looked like nothing he had ever seen. Some were tall and thin like stretched shadows. Some were small and round and covered in fur. Some existed as clouds of gas held together by invisible forces. Some had no physical form at all, appearing only as lights or sounds or feelings in the air. The High Arbiter presided over the chamber from a raised platform at its center. The Arbiter was a being of pure energy, contained within a suit of strange metal that hummed with power. Its voice echoed through the chamber without any apparent source, translated into the language of every species present by technology that humans could barely understand. Daniel was directed to a small platform at the edge of the chamber, the section reserved for probationary species. He noticed that the platform was lower than all the others, positioned so that he had to look up at every other representative. He understood the message clearly. Humanity was at the bottom of this hierarchy. Everyone wanted them to know it. The Vorthani representative was the first to speak. Its name was Christos, and its body was made of pale blue crystal that caught the light with every movement. It spoke about humanity with the tone of an adult discussing a child who had wandered into an important meeting. Christos acknowledged that humans had achieved faster-than-light travel, which was the minimum requirement for council consideration. But it reminded the chamber that many species had achieved this milestone, and most had taken centuries to prove themselves worthy of full membership. Other representatives spoke in turn. Some were curious about humans, asking questions about their biology and culture and history. Others were dismissive, suggesting that humanity should be grateful for even this limited opportunity. A few were hostile, pointing to humanity's history of war and environmental destruction as evidence that they could not be trusted. Daniel listened to everything without interruption. He took notes on his datapad and watched the reactions of other species as they spoke. He noticed that many of the smaller and younger species seemed sympathetic to humanity, while the older and more powerful ones were skeptical or opposed. He filed this information away for later use. When it was finally his turn to speak, Daniel walked to the central podium with slow and deliberate steps. He could feel countless alien eyes watching him, judging him, measuring him against standards he did not fully understand. He took a deep breath and began. He did not make grand claims about human superiority or destiny. He did not promise that humanity would change the galaxy or lead other species to greatness. Instead, he spoke honestly about who humans were and where they came from. He talked about their long journey from caves to cities to stars. He talked about their wars, their failures, their moments of cruelty and selfishness. But he also talked about their capacity for growth, their ability to learn from mistakes, their stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. He ended his speech with a simple request. He asked the council to give humanity a chance to prove themselves, not through words, but through actions. He said that humans did not expect to be treated as equals, not yet. They only asked for the opportunity to earn that status through hard work and good faith. The chamber was silent for a long moment after he finished. Then Christos made a sound like breaking glass, a Vorthani expression of amusement. The crystalline being declared that humans spoke well for primitives and proposed granting them observer status, the lowest possible tier of council membership. The vote passed quickly, with only a few species bothering to oppose. Daniel accepted the decision with grace, thanking the council for their consideration. As he returned to his small platform at the edge of the chamber, Maria asked him quietly if he was disappointed. He shook his head and told her that this was only the beginning. Humanity had a foot in the door now, and that was all they needed. The real work was about to begin. 6 months passed since humanity took their place in the observer gallery of the Galactic Council. Daniel Cooper attended every session, watching and learning and taking careful notes about how the galaxy actually worked. He learned which species could be trusted and which ones lied with every breath. He learned which ancient rivalries still burned hot beneath the surface of polite diplomacy. He learned that the council moved slowly, debating every decision for weeks or months, while real problems grew worse. Maria Santos worked beside him every day, building a network of contacts among the junior diplomats and staff members who kept the station running. She discovered that many of these lower-ranking beings were frustrated with the council's endless delays. They wanted change, but felt powerless to make it happen. Maria told Daniel that these people could become valuable allies if humanity played their cards right. Then the crisis came without warning. Velith Station was one of the largest trading hubs in the galaxy, a massive structure floating at the intersection of 7 different hyperspace routes. Over 2 million beings lived and worked there, representing dozens of different species. The station had operated safely for over 3,000 years, a symbol of galactic cooperation and commerce. On that terrible morning, the station's main reactor suffered a catastrophic failure. The explosion killed 200 workers instantly and damaged critical systems throughout the structure. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, trapping thousands of beings in sections with failing life support. The station's commander, a Thalian named Vortrek, sent a desperate message to the council begging for immediate assistance. Daniel was in the observer gallery when the message arrived. He watched as the chamber erupted into chaos, representatives shouting over each other in a dozen different languages. The translation systems struggled to keep up with the flood of voices, creating a confusing mess of overlapping words and sounds. The High Arbiter called for order and asked for proposals to address the crisis. Christos of the Vorthani spoke first, proposing that the council send a rescue fleet that could arrive in 72 hours. The crystalline being explained that proper protocols must be followed, that ships must be gathered and crews must be briefed and supplies must be loaded. Rushing into action without preparation would only create more problems. Daniel felt his stomach turn as he listened. 72 hours was far too long. The reports from Velith Station indicated that life support would fail completely in 12 hours, maybe less. 2 million beings would suffocate in the cold darkness of space while the Council followed proper protocols. Other species offered their own proposals, each one protecting their own interests first. The Cathari suggested prioritizing the evacuation of their hive members. The Meridians proposed sending medical ships to treat survivors after the crisis passed. Nobody seemed willing to act immediately, to take risks, to put the lives of strangers ahead of their own safety and convenience. Maria leaned close to Daniel and spoke in a low voice. She told him that the human vessel Endeavor was currently in the same sector as Velith Station. It's less than 4 hours away at maximum speed. The ship was commanded by Captain Lisa Monroe, a veteran officer with extensive experience in disaster response. The Endeavor only had a crew of 200, far too few to evacuate millions, but they could help stabilize the situation until larger rescue forces arrived. Daniel understood immediately what Maria was suggesting. He also understood the risks. If he spoke up now, he would be breaking Council protocol. Observers were not supposed to address the chamber directly. The older species would see it as arrogance, a primitive human overstepping his place. It could damage humanity's reputation and set back their progress by years. But 2 million beings were dying while he sat in silence. Daniel stood up from his seat and walked toward the central speaking platform. Security drones moved to intercept him, their weapons humming with energy. The chamber fell silent as every eye turned toward the human who dared to break the rules. The High Arbiter raised a tendril and the drone stopped. The energy being's voice echoed through the chamber, asking if the human wished to address the Council. Daniel said that he did if the Arbiter would permit it. The Arbiter granted permission, and Daniel took his place at the podium. He felt his heart pounding in his chest but kept his voice calm and steady. He explained that humanity had a ship within range of Velith Station, a vessel called the Endeavor, under Captain Lisa Monroe. He offered this ship to assist with the crisis immediately, without waiting for the larger rescue fleet. Christos made the breaking glass sound again. But this time, there was no amusement in it. The Vorsani demanded to know what one primitive human ship could possibly accomplish against a disaster of this magnitude. Daniel admitted that the Endeavor could not save everyone. But Captain Monroe and her crew could help organize evacuation efforts, stabilize critical systems, and keep people alive until reinforcements arrived. It was better than doing nothing while millions died. The Council voted quickly, too surprised by the humans' boldness to mount serious opposition. The Endeavor was authorized to proceed to Velith Station with all possible speed. Captain Lisa Monroe received the orders 4 minutes later. She was 43 years old, with gray streaking her dark hair and a reputation for solving impossible problems. Her crew trusted her completely, and she trusted them the same way. When she announced their new mission over the ship's communication system, not a single person hesitated. The Endeavor arrived at Velith Station in 3 hours and 47 minutes, pushing its engines beyond safe limits. What Lisa found was worse than the reports had suggested. Entire sections of the station were dark and cold, filled with beings who had already suffocated. Other sections were overcrowded with survivors fighting for the last scraps of breathable air. The station's remaining systems were failing one by one, each failure bringing the final collapse closer. Lisa did not waste time with despair. She immediately contacted Vortrek and took command of the rescue operation with the Thaleen's grateful permission. She organized her crew into teams, sending them throughout the station to restore life support, treat the wounded, and coordinate evacuation efforts. She deputized capable individuals from every species present, giving them clear tasks and the authority to carry them out. The station's reactor was the biggest problem. Chief Engineer Paul Harrison reported that the core was unstable and heading toward a complete meltdown. If it exploded, everyone still on the station would die. The only way to prevent it was for someone to enter the radiation zone and manually stabilize the core. It was almost certainly a suicide mission. Paul volunteered without hesitation. He told Lisa that he was the best engineer on the ship and the only one with a real chance of success. Lisa wanted to argue, but knew he was right. She gave him permission and watched him walk toward the reactor chamber with steady steps. The next 6 hours were the longest of Lisa's life. She coordinated the evacuation of over 1.8 million beings, while Paul fought to keep the reactor from killing them all. Transport ships arrived from nearby stations, filling their holds with refugees and racing back for more. Lisa worked without rest, her voice growing hoarse from constant orders and encouragement. Paul succeeded. He stabilized the reactor with 3 minutes to spare, then collapsed from radiation exposure. Medical teams rushed him to the Endeavour's sickbay, where doctors worked frantically to save his life. He survived, though his recovery would take months. When the official Council rescue fleet finally arrived, they found a station that was damaged but stable. The evacuation was nearly complete. Over 1.8 million beings had been saved from certain death. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. A single human ship had accomplished what the mighty Council could not even agree to attempt. Everything was about to change. The news of Velith Station spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every news network on every world carried the story of the human ship that had saved 2 million lives while the Council debated. Images of Captain Lisa Monroe, directing rescue operations, played on screens from one end of civilized space to the other. Chief Engineer Paul Harrison became a symbol of human courage, a man who had walked into certain death to save strangers he had never met. Daniel Cooper found himself at the center of a storm he had not expected. Species that had ignored humanity for 6 months now requested urgent meetings with their ambassador. Trade delegations arrived at Earth with offers that would have seemed like fantasy just weeks before. The Thalians, whose people made up nearly a quarter of Velith Station's population, declared humanity their eternal friends and allies. But Daniel understood that fame was a double-edged blade. For every species that admired humanity's actions, another felt threatened or resentful. The Vorthani in particular saw the humans as a growing danger to their ancient dominance of council politics. Christos began a quiet campaign to undermine humanity's new reputation, spreading whispers about human aggression and unpredictability. Through back channels and private conversations, Daniel responded to these attacks with patience and grace. He refused to engage in public arguments or accusations. Instead, he focused on building genuine relationships with other species, one conversation at a time. He learned to speak 3 alien languages without relying on translation devices, spending long nights studying grammar and pronunciation until his throat ached. He memorized the cultural customs of dozens of civilizations, knowing that small gestures of respect could open doors that grand speeches never would. Maria Santos worked alongside him, managing the flood of requests and opportunities that poured into the human delegation every day. She told Daniel that he was becoming something rare in galactic politics, a leader that other species actually trusted. Most ambassadors were skilled liars who said whatever served their interests. Daniel said what he believed and did what he promised. In a galaxy full of deception, honesty was revolutionary. 3 years passed in a blur of negotiations and ceremonies and careful diplomatic work. Humanity's status in the Council rose steadily, from observers to provisional members to full voting participants. Human ships became a common sight at stations and outposts across civilized space. Human traders established profitable relationships with dozens of species. Human scientists collaborated with alien researchers on projects that pushed the boundaries of knowledge. Then the position of council president became vacant. The previous president, a Meridian diplomat named Solas, had completed his 5-year term and was returning to his homeworld. The role of president was largely ceremonial, a rotating honor that different species held in turn. But the president also served important functions, casting the deciding vote when the council was deadlocked and speaking for all member species in communications with outsiders. Nobody expected Daniel Cooper to be nominated for the position. Humans were still newcomers by galactic standards. their membership measured in years while other species counted millennia. The idea of a human leading the council seemed absurd to most observers. The nomination came from the most unlikely source imaginable. Ambassador Zethrai of the Cathari rose to speak during the session where candidates were proposed. The insectoid being's compound eyes glittered as it addressed the chamber. In the clicking language of its hive, Zethrai explained that the Cathari had been studying humans intensely since the events at Veloth Station. The hive mind species found human psychology fascinating, particularly their ability to coordinate complex actions without sharing consciousness. Individual humans could make independent decisions while still working toward common goals. This balance between personal initiative and collective purpose was something the Cathari had never seen before in any other species. The Cathari believed that Daniel Cooper embodied this balance perfectly. He had shown the courage to act alone when he broke protocol to offer the Endeavor's assistance. He had also shown the wisdom to work within the system, building alliances and earning trust over years of patient effort. Zethrai formally nominated Daniel Cooper for the position of council president. The chamber exploded into chaos. Christos shattered, a ceremonial crystal, in fury, demanding to know how the council could even consider such an insult to tradition. Other Vorthani representatives joined the protest, their bodies flickering with agitation. Species allied with the Vorthani raised their own objections, citing humanity's brief membership and limited experience. But other voices rose in support. Vortrek of the Thalians spoke passionately about the debt his people owed to humanity. Representatives from dozens of smaller species expressed their belief that the council needed new perspectives and fresh approaches. The debate raged for 3 standard days, with neither side willing to yield. Daniel himself remained calm throughout the storm. He answered questions about his qualifications and intentions with the same measured honesty that had defined his entire career. When hostile representatives tried to provoke him with insults and accusations, he responded with courtesy and reason. When allies pressed him to attack his opponents, he refused to lower himself to that level. On the final day of debate, a Vorthani representative named Thalos asked Daniel a question that silenced the entire chamber. Talos wanted to know why Daniel believed he should lead species that were far older and more advanced than his own. What could a human possibly offer that the ancient civilizations of the galaxy lacked? Daniel stood at the central podium and considered the question carefully before responding. He said that he did not seek leadership because humans were superior. They were not. Humans were young and impulsive and had made terrible mistakes throughout their history. They had fought wars over foolish things. They had damaged their own planet through greed and short-sightedness. They had treated each other with cruelty that still shamed them. But perhaps that was exactly why he was qualified. Daniel said that he understood failure because his species had failed so many times. He understood the need for second chances because humans had needed so many of them. He understood that wisdom did not come from age alone, but from the willingness to learn from every being you encountered. Daniel told the chamber that he would not pretend to be wiser than the Vorthani, or more logical than the Cathari, or more experienced than any of the ancient species represented in this room, but he could promise to listen to every voice, to consider every perspective, and to make decisions based on what was best for all species, rather than any single group. He ended by saying that the galaxy faced challenges that no species could solve alone. Climate changes on 100 worlds, economic instabilities that threaten trade networks, rising tensions between old rivals. These problems required cooperation across boundaries of species and culture and history. He believed he could help build that cooperation, not because humans had all the answers, but because they had learned the hard way that no one did. The vote took place the following morning. Every species cast their ballot in the ancient ritual that had governed council elections for 40,000 years. The counting took 6 hours, the result remaining secret until the final tally was complete. When the High Arbiter announced the results, the chamber fell silent. Daniel Cooper had won by 17 votes. A human, a representative of a species that had been among the stars for less than a century, was now president of the Galaxy Council. Maria Santos was the first to reach him, throwing her arms around him in an embrace that broke every rule of diplomatic protocol. Daniel hugged her back and whispered that the real work was only beginning. He had no idea how right he was. The reaction to Daniel Cooper's election swept across the galaxy like a great wave crashing against 1,000 shores. On some worlds, being celebrated in the streets, cheering for the human who had risen from nothing to lead the greatest governing body in known space. On other worlds, panic spread through populations that had been taught since birth that humans were dangerous primitives who could not be trusted. The Vorthani. Homeworld experienced the strongest reaction of all. Protests erupted in the ancient crystalline cities, with millions of beings gathering to demand that the election be overturned. Vorthani news networks broadcast endless warnings about human unpredictability, showing images of Earth's nuclear weapons and polluted oceans and bloody wars. Commentators spoke gravely about the end of galactic civilization, predicting that the humans would destroy everything the Council had built over 40,000 years. Christos emerged as the leader of the opposition movement. The crystalline diplomat refused to accept Daniel's victory, calling it a manipulation by younger species who did not understand the natural order of things. Christos began building a coalition of like-minded representatives, seeking to limit the new president's authority through procedural obstacles and bureaucratic resistance. The Mechanar Collective, a species of networked artificial intelligences, added fuel to the fire by releasing their probability analysis of human leadership. Their calculations predicted a 34% chance of significant policy disruption under Daniel's presidency. More alarmingly, they estimated a 12% chance of complete council collapse within the first decade. These numbers spread across the galaxy's information networks, frightening species who trusted mathematical predictions more than political speeches. Even humanity's allies expressed private concerns about what lay ahead. Ambassador Vortrek of the Tholians visited Daniel in his new office, a magnificent chamber at the top of the council's administrative spire. The room had windows on every wall, offering views of the assembled fleets from 100 different worlds. Daniel found the view both inspiring and intimidating. Vortrek settled into a chair designed for beings with 4 legs and fixed all 4 of his eyes on Daniel. The Thalian spoke bluntly, as was customary for his species. He told Daniel that half the galaxy was waiting for him to fail. These beings wanted failure because it would confirm everything they believed about humans. It would prove that the natural order was correct and that young species should know their place. Daniel asked about the other half of the galaxy. Vortrek made a rumbling sound that served as Tholian laughter. He said that the other half was terrified that Daniel would succeed. If a human could lead the council effectively, it meant everything these species thought they knew about civilization was wrong. It meant that age and technology and ancient wisdom were not the only measures of worth. Many powerful beings found this possibility even more frightening than failure. Daniel thanked Vortrek for his honesty and promised to do his best, regardless of what anyone expected. The Thalian departed with a warning to watch his back, because not all dangers would come from the front. The first months of Daniel's presidency tested him in ways he had never imagined. A territorial dispute between the Cathari and their neighbors, a reptilian species called the Sorthan, threatened to escalate into open war. Both sides had legitimate grievances stretching back centuries, and both sides refused to yield a single point. Previous council presidents had managed this conflict by ignoring it, hoping it would resolve itself. Daniel decided on a different approach. He traveled personally to the disputed border region. Meeting with representatives from both species and neutral territory, he listened to their complaints for 3 full days without interruption, taking careful notes and asking questions that showed he understood their concerns. Then he proposed a solution that neither side had considered: shared administration of the disputed worlds that gave both species access to the resources they needed. The agreement was not perfect, but it was better than war. Both sides accepted it with relief. A plague struck 3 agricultural worlds in the outer systems, killing thousands and threatening the food supply for dozens of colonies. The affected species begged the council for help, but ancient regulations prevented rapid response. Medical supplies had to be approved by 17 different committees before they could be shipped. By the time the bureaucracy finished its work, millions could be dead. Daniel cut through the regulations with emergency executive orders. authorizing immediate shipments of medicine and food to the affected worlds. Some representatives protested that he was overstepping his authority, but Daniel responded that he would rather face political consequences than let innocent beings starve. The supplies arrived in time, and the plague was contained within weeks. Pirates operating in the outer systems grew bold during this period of transition, attacking shipping lanes that had been safe for centuries. They believed the new human president would be too distracted by internal politics to respond effectively. They were wrong. Daniel coordinated a joint military operation involving ships from 12 different species, hunting down the pirate bases and destroying them one by one. The operation was efficient and decisive, sending a clear message that lawlessness would not be tolerated. Through all these challenges, Daniel maintained a leadership style that confused his opponents. He did not try to impose human solutions on alien problems. He listened more than he spoke. He appointed advisors from species that had opposed his election, including a Vorthani named Thalos, who had questioned his qualifications during the campaign. Thalos eventually became one of his strongest supporters. Impressed by Daniel's willingness to consider perspectives different from his own, Maria Santos, now elevated to Chief of Staff, watched Daniel work 80-hour days without complaint. She observed him reviewing reports late into the night cycle, preparing for meetings that would determine the fate of billions. One evening, she told him that he was trying to prove something to the galaxy. Daniel shook his head and replied that he was trying to prove something to himself, that the faith others had placed in him was not a mistake. The turning point of Daniel's early presidency came with the Syndicate crisis. Maria's network of contacts uncovered evidence that a coalition of corporate interests from multiple species had been secretly manipulating commodity prices across the galaxy. This manipulation caused economic instability on dozens of worlds, driving some populations into poverty while enriching the conspirators. The Syndicate, as the coalition called itself, had operated in shadows for decades, bribing officials and silencing investigators who got too close to the truth. When Daniel's investigation became public knowledge, the Syndicate responded with everything they had. They released fabricated recordings that seemed to show Daniel promising special treatment to human corporations. They bribed officials throughout the council bureaucracy to create obstacles and delays. They planted false stories in news networks across the galaxy, painting Daniel as a corrupt leader who had fooled everyone with his humble act. Then they tried to kill him. The assassination attempt came during a diplomatic visit to the Meridian homeworld. A bomb was planted in Daniel's transport vehicle, set to detonate when he entered. Only the quick thinking of his security chief, Commander Kevin Park, prevented disaster. Kevin noticed a tiny irregularity in the vehicle's undercarriage and ordered an immediate evacuation. The bomb exploded 30 seconds later, destroying the vehicle and killing 2 Meridian guards who had not moved fast enough. Daniel survived without injury. But the attack changed everything. He could have responded with anger and accusations, using the assassination attempt to destroy his political enemies. Instead, he called a special session of the council and presented all the evidence his team had gathered about the Syndicate. He laid out the facts clearly and completely, hiding nothing, and asked the council to decide how to respond. The transparency shocked the galaxy. Previous leaders had always managed information carefully, revealing only what served their interests. Daniel's willingness to expose a crisis that threatened his own presidency demonstrated a kind of leadership that most species had never seen. The Syndicate collapsed within weeks. As its members turned on each other, desperate to avoid punishment, the council imposed heavy sanctions on the corporations involved, and several high-ranking conspirators faced criminal prosecution. Daniel's approval ratings among member species reached levels that no previous president had achieved. He had survived the fire, but the greatest challenges still lay ahead. 5 years passed like water flowing through open fingers. Daniel Cooper stood at the window of his office on the final day of his presidency. Watching the endless dance of ships around Nexus Prime, he remembered standing at a similar window on his first day in this room, feeling the weight of impossible expectations pressing down on his shoulders. Now those shoulders carried the memories of countless decisions, some triumphant and some painful. all of them shaping the galaxy in ways he's only beginning to understand. The council he would leave behind was different from the one he had inherited, not through revolution or dramatic transformation, but through thousands of small changes that had accumulated over time, like snow building into mountains. He had worked patiently to reform institutions that had grown rigid with age, introducing flexibility where there had been only tradition. The rapid response protocols were his proudest achievement. Modeled on Captain Lisa Monroe's actions at Velith Station, these new procedures ensured that future crises would be met with immediate assistance rather than endless debate. Emergency response teams from multiple species trained together and deployed together, ready to help any world-facing disaster. The days of watching millions die while committees discussed proper procedures were over. He had created exchange programs that sent young diplomats from different species to serve in each other's delegations. A Vorthani apprentice might spend a year working alongside Thealine negotiators, learning their customs and building friendships that would last a lifetime. A human trainee might study Cathori hive communication, gaining insights that no textbook could provide. These programs were building bridges between species that had misunderstood each other for millennia. The voting reforms had been the most difficult battle. Smaller species had long complained that their voices were drowned out by the ancient powers who dominated council politics. Daniel pushed through changes that gave these younger civilizations more influence over decisions that affected them directly. The Vorthani and their allies fought against every modification, but Daniel built coalitions that proved stronger than their resistance. Maria Santos had been beside him through all of it, managing the endless details that kept the presidency functioning. She had grown from his aide into his partner, the person he trusted more than anyone else in the universe. When he made mistakes, she told him honestly. When he succeeded, she reminded him to stay humble. He could not have survived 5 years without her steady presence. The galaxy itself had changed in ways that went beyond politics and procedures. Humanity was no longer seen as clever primitives who had stumbled into the stars by accident. They were recognized as something different. A species defined not by their technology or their ancient history, but by their willingness to act when action was needed. Humans were not better than other species, but they brought a perspective that the galaxy had been missing. A way of seeing problems that valued both individual courage and collective responsibility. This change showed itself in countless, small moments across civilized space. A Thalian captain facing a difficult decision might ask herself what a human would do in this situation. A Cathari diplomat struggling with a negotiation might remember stories of Daniel Cooper's patience and try to find common ground. A young Vorthani, questioning the rigid traditions of their elders, might point to humanity as proof that change was possible. Daniel had received word that morning of his successor. The council had elected a new president, continuing the tradition of rotating leadership among different species. But this time, the choice carried special significance. Captain Lisa Monroe, the hero of Velith Station, had been nominated and elected by an even larger margin than Daniel himself. Humanity would hold the presidency for another 5 years, a sign of trust that would have seemed impossible when Daniel first arrived at Nexus Prime. Lisa visited him that afternoon, entering his office with the confident stride of a woman who had faced death and emerged stronger. Her hair was more gray than dark now, and lines had formed around her eyes from years of difficult service. But her spirit remained unchanged. That combination of determination and compassion that had saved 2 million lives on a dying station. She asked Daniel for advice about the years ahead. He smiled and told her that she did not need his advice. She had proven herself through actions that spoke louder than any words he could offer. But he shared one thought that had guided him through his own presidency. He said that the galaxy did not need leaders who had all the answers. It needed leaders who were willing to ask the right questions and listen to the responses. Lisa nodded and promised to remember his words. She asked if he had any regrets about his time in office. Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. He said that he regretted every life lost during crises he could not prevent, every conflict he failed to resolve, every moment when he fell short of the trust others had placed in him. But he did not regret taking the chance when it was offered. Better to try and fail than to never try at all. The final session of Daniel's presidency took place that evening. The council chamber was filled beyond capacity. The representatives from every member species gathered to witness the transition of power. Even Christos attended, the old Vorthani who had opposed Daniel's election so fiercely 5 years before. Time and experience had softened the crystalline diplomat's hostility. Though they would never be friends, Daniel walked to the central podium for the last time, feeling the eyes of the galaxy upon him. He had prepared remarks for this moment, careful words crafted to summarize his presidency and express gratitude to those who had supported him. But standing before the assembled representatives, he set those prepared words aside and spoke from his heart instead. He told the chamber that when he first stood in this room, he represented a species asking for permission to observe. Humans had been newcomers, outsiders, primitives in the eyes of many who watched them. Today he stood as evidence that observation was never enough. The galaxy did not need species who watched from the sidelines while others struggled. It needed peoples who were willing to step forward, to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, and to try again. He spoke about the challenges that remained. Climate changes threatened 100 worlds. Economic inequalities divided rich systems from poor ones. Ancient hatreds still simmered beneath the surface of polite diplomacy. These problems would not solve themselves. They required cooperation across every boundary that separated one species from another. He ended with words that would be remembered long after everything else was forgotten. He said that his species had a saying passed down through generations of struggle and survival. One person can make a difference. He had never believed he would be that person. But he had learned during his years as president that every being in this chamber, every citizen of every world they represented, had the same potential. The question was not whether they were capable of making a difference. The question was whether they were willing to try. The applause began slowly, few representatives showing appreciation through the customs of their species. Then it grew, spreading through the chamber like sunrise spreading across a planet. Soon, the entire assembly was on its feet. Crystalline beings chiming, insectoid beings clicking, energy beings pulsing with light. The ovation lasted for nearly an hour, wave after wave of gratitude and respect washing over the human who had changed everything. Daniel Cooper retired to a quiet life on Earth after the ceremony. He refused offers of continued political power, telling those who asked that he had done what he could, and now it was time for others to carry the torch forward. He wrote his memoirs in a small house overlooking the ocean, sharing the lessons he had learned with future generations. He taught at universities when asked, helping young humans understand their place in the larger galaxy. He advised his successors when they sought his counsel, always offering wisdom without demanding credit. But the real legacy of Daniel Cooper was not his presidency or his reforms, or even the changed perception of humanity across the stars. It was simpler and more profound than any of those things. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, beings of every species began asking themselves a question they had never considered before. When facing difficult choices, when standing at crossroads between action and inaction, when wondering whether one person could truly make a difference, they asked themselves for simple words. What would a human do? And sometimes, when they found the courage to answer that question honestly, they discovered they could do it themselves.